Welcome back to Ask a Coroner, Inside the Coroner's Office, the podcast where we answer the questions people have always wanted to ask about death investigations. I'm Mark Hammond, Boyd County Coroner.
I'm Bailey Rucker, Deputy Coroner. Today's episode is going to be something that's really intriguing and something that's getting talked about a lot really around the U.S., and that's part-time death and the hidden crisis in America about how America investigates death around the world.
And it's not just in Kentucky. We're going to talk a little bit about Kentucky specific, but the problem with death investigation is, you're exactly right, a lot of people consider it part-time, and that's the furthest from the truth. We know that, everybody knows that. And in Kentucky, we'll take Kentucky for instance, there is a lot of part-time, or what people consider part-time death investigators, because they're the coroner. Mm-hmm. They're an elected official, and does it matter where you die? Does it matter as far as how your investigation goes? And the answer is yes. I mean, we see that every day. And it's across the nation the same way, because basically in Kentucky, it's up to the local court system, the fiscal court, or your governing body to decide how much death investigation is truly worth. And a lot of people says, well, money only goes to certain expenses, or you only can take it so far. But what people need to remember is, with death investigation, people don't think about it. It's not political. It's not the fact that it comes up and it's not tangible. You can't touch it. And a lot of times, if it doesn't affect you, you don't worry about it. And in Kentucky, it is true that the simple fact is, you wouldn't want a part-time sheriff. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't want a part-time jailer. You wouldn't want a part-time county clerk. Why is it okay to have a part-time coroner? And it's not. But out of necessity, coroners a lot of times have to work a second job just to make ends meet, because the coroner's job pays so little.
And that's one thing you mentioned. The sheriffs, the jailers, the county clerks, they're all elected officials just like you. So why is there that big salary difference and part-time versus full-time criteria?
Well, I think in a lot of counties, funeral homes have always took care of death. And a lot of people, and we could go back to the first episode that we ever did here, and there's nothing wrong with funeral directors or anybody else that owns a funeral home being a coroner. But the problem is, it takes a lot of workload and a lot of money off the county systems. A lot of funeral homes that are coroners end up having to pay out of pocket to do the transports, to take care of their equipment and everything else. A lot of coroners don't have regular offices. We're lucky. In Boyd County, we do have an office. We have a full-service morgue. We have a full-time office manager. We have all the stuff because our county has invested in us. But at the same time, that doesn't happen in other counties. And there's something wrong with that. There's something wrong, and that's a crisis, a hidden crisis across the United States. If you look at a coroner system across the United States, that medical legal death investigation system accounts for about 80% of the offices across the U.S. And guaranteed, those offices are not where another office. Like, you may go into one county and that office be great. The next county, they may be buying their own gloves, their own body bags. They may be using all their own equipment because the county doesn't want it, or they can't afford it, or they say they can't afford it. And really, it boils down to the simple fact: what is death investigation worth? What truly, and what amount is truly your loved one worth when it comes to making sure that investigation is correct and it's handled correctly?
And that's what some people don't realize, I think, is the amount of time that goes into each case like that. You wouldn't want somebody just coming in and saying, oh yeah, Meemaw's dead, here's this, call the funeral home, and leave. And that's why it's so intriguing and intricate how all of our episodes have talked about how much work goes into that. So how important is that detail?
Let's take a scenario. Let's just put the big picture out there. In Kentucky, we handle, at least in our county, we handle anything that happens inside a house. Yesterday, elderly gentleman, he was supposed to go to hospice or be evaluated by hospice today. He didn't make it there. So in turn, we responded. Before we got there, we had police, we had fire, and we had EMS there. None of those people are experts in death investigation. Now, all those people say, okay, it looks natural, there's nothing wrong, and we could release, look at a bigger city. They may call this into intake, and they would say, okay, we can release that to a funeral home. It's no big deal. The person's not looked at really, no toxicology is done, and they're released because they're old, they have a medical history, and there's something to sign that death out. But is that really truly what happens to that person? And the answer is no. Because even though that person's elderly, even though that person has a lot of medical conditions, what do? We go and we investigate, right? So we go in and we talk to the family, we take pictures, we inventory medications, and we take them back to our office to where they are gone over with a postmortem examination, all an external exam. More pictures are taken, toxicology's done, and then they're released to the funeral home. So that is a complete investigation. If you don't do that, a lot of things will slip through the cracks. And that's where money talks a lot of times. And when I say money talks, there's places out there across the United States that have to pay for their toxicology. So guess what? We're not going to tox everybody. There's places out there that have to pay for autopsies. Guess what? We're not going to do autopsies. So all those come into play when it comes to this hidden crisis that's out there that nobody really wants to talk about.
Okay, so now let's put that perspective into numbers. So we've looked at a couple different things, and there's 330 million people roughly in the U.S. So probably 3.4 million people die a year. So how many of those get autopsied? How many of those get investigated? And how many people can do those investigations? All those numbers that come into play.
Well, there's really about 2,000 different death investigation offices across the United States. 70 to 80% of those are coroners, so they could be elected, it could be different things. Some of those are straight ME's offices, some of those are hybrid offices. So out of that, probably statistics show that up to 1 million of those are investigated. And when we're talking about investigations, it really doesn't break down how those investigations go. So the big thing to ask is, are they all at least toxicology done? Is at least an external examination done? And the answer is no, because the laws are so different depending on what state you go into. So depending on where you're at is going to depend on truly what happens to you. And I can give you a great example of that is I had a relative that lived out of state, and she died suddenly at home, worked into the hospital, and she was right at 60, and they weren't going to do an autopsy. They weren't going to do anything. They were basically, the doctor could sign it out and it was going to be done. And until I brought up a lot of the laws that's in that state, because I wanted the autopsy. And then she had a full investigation to where we could tell her true cause and manner of death compared to let's just guess and say this. So that boils down to money a lot of times. It boils down to how many investigators you have. You look at bigger cities that have 3 million people in their jurisdiction, and you got to look at how many people die a day. Do they have enough? And the answer is no, they don't, because we know that there's only, 30,000 investigators, some type of investigation?
Really like 11,000, and then so that leaves, with all the other numbers, that's like one person investigating 30,000 people.
Yeah, one person for every 30,000 deaths.
Yeah.
And when you look at that, it's like, that's crazy. But you wouldn't have a sheriff's department investigating 30,000 calls with one person.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't have one jailer running 30,000 people. But it's okay to do that with death, and it's wrong. It's and that is starting to show, and those cracks are starting to show across the United States.
Okay, so now let's look at a real, and you kind of used some examples also. So an elderly person dies at home and nothing looks suspicious. You kind of already touched on this, but like police is there, everything, we're cooperating with everybody. So what could be different in counties that determine that investigation and how thorough it is?
Some, depending on the coroner or depending on the medical investigator, a lot of times that phone call is made to an intake service. And that intake service says, okay, they make the phone call to the sheriff's department. Sheriff's department calls and says, hey, this is the death we got. And they're talking to the coroner, they're talking to the medical examiner. Okay, they're on this kind of medications. He's got heart problems or she's got heart problems. They got high blood pressure. They got diabetes. They've got COPD. They've got all the stuff that would say, okay, I can sign this death out without even looking at that body. And in a lot of places that happens. Thankfully, it doesn't happen in our jurisdiction. In our jurisdiction, we would get the phone call by the paramedics that say, dispatch, we need the coroner. Boom, we show up, and we would come in and we would talk to the police. We would talk to the medics, get their story, then go talk to the family, get their story, and truly investigate that death. And a lot of families are like, why are you taking them with you? Why isn't the funeral home called? Because our investigation's not over with. And so that's when it truly says, okay, are you doing toxicology on that person? And the answer is yes. We did and I think I talked about this before, but we did numbers one time. In our head, perception a lot of times will steer you wrong. Mm-hmm. So at that time, Lacey worked the office. She was the office manager, and of course, numbers come to play with her.
Yeah, always.
And so she was like, what percentage of deaths do you think you all tox? How many times do you do toxicology? Everybody was like 90%, 95%, 97%. We were all in the 90s. And she was like, the true number is 78%. And we were like, wow, guess what? We let a lot of things that maybe would slip through that we would have changed on a death certificate. So what did we do? We made it a goal to where we're going to tox 100% of our deaths unless we can prove otherwise. If it comes in, we even tox people that come in from nursing homes. We tox people if they worked into the ER. So everything, we have a cause and manner of death, what we think preliminary. But what do we always tell the families?
Everything's changed. It can change.
It can change. It can change because if we do toxicology, which we do, and the first thing I say is there's no disrespect, but that's part of our investigation. It's an investigative tool that we use. We get back that toxicology and we could find a medication in there that totally is, the numbers are off the chart. And it's like, okay, now why is that off the chart? Well, it could be the fact that they have kidney failure and the kidneys are not letting everything metabolize out the system, so that drug builds up. Well, that drug, if it's built up in the system, can cause things like, such as you could have issues with arrhythmias, different things like that. So that could contribute to their death. And we would have never found that if we hadn't have been paying attention.
Mm-hmm. And that's why I think our medication count is so important too. Taking the prescription medicines from the scene, counting them, knowing exactly what they're taking, when they're taking them, getting that true count can answer a lot of those. Like, we can put those puzzle pieces together with the toxicology versus what their actual count's saying too.
Correct, and that makes a lot of difference to us. People mix up their medicines, and if you mix up even a medicine that's not necessarily a narcotic, it could still cause you a lot of problems. Trazodone is a big one out there that people take for sleeping. Well, if that builds up in your system, it can cause you a lot of issues that could cause an overdose depending on how high that level is.
And a lot of things happen on the back end too that I don't think people realize. Like, if you're taking this for so long and then you stop, it might still bite you in the butt a couple months later or something like that.
Oh yeah, so you got to pay attention because medications stay in your system for so long.
Yeah.
And medications have half-lives. It's like methadone. There's methadone clinics everywhere because of addiction and everything. The thing about methadone is methadone takes 9 cycles to go out of your system. So it has 9 different half-lives before it goes out of your system. So it can build up in there really quick.
Okay, so back to the numbers thing. Of those 11,000 people, we'll focus fully on the ones in Kentucky just to talk about the salary differences and everything. So numbers in Kentucky, it's kind of insane, but coroners average $24,000 a year. And that's, the highest and lowest. Like, where do you go from there?
So what happens in Kentucky is every 4 years of the election year, a salary has to be set for January 1. So you set that salary for whoever the coroner is going to be January 1. And in Kentucky, that ranges anywhere from $5,000 a year, which is totally crazy, to
Wow.
the last count that came out in January this year was $97,800 and some dollars. So you take what a jailer, a county judge, a county clerk, and a sheriff all make the same money in Kentucky. And if you put that figure there, it would still be about 30% less than what they are obligated to be paid. It's not their fault.
Mm-hmm.
You know, nobody says you have to pay them that according to KRS is in there, and nobody says, okay, you can't pay them that.
Yeah.
It's not that easy. It's a law. This is what goes in. Coroners were left out of that law. So when coroners get left out of that law, we've been left out for years. So every 4 years, it's like you go beg to
Please let me
the
have a
fiscal
living
court,
salary.
give me some money, and it's like, give me a raise, let me get a living wage. And you take a lot of coroners, they have that and all they got to do is say no, we're not giving you that. Then what happens? Either A, you don't run, or B, somebody else is going to do it and make that livable wage, or not make the livable wage. They'll take the low salary, and depending on what they're doing it for, you lose all that experience. You lose all the experience that you had as for death investigations, and you start at square one. And you're starting to see that now. You see, when I got into this, 75% was funeral home directors that ran that, and the other 25% were people that are non-funeral home directors, whether that be they have a background or they don't. And in Kentucky, anybody can run for coroner. They got to be 24 years old, and they don't have to have experience. And I think that's crazy.
Yeah.
There has to be some standards set, and when you set those standards, then you get quality investigations, and that's the thing that we look for. All of Kentucky's training goes through the Department of Criminal Justice, which other states doesn't do that even. So we have that, and then it's up to the office to make sure that they get their training. So you have to have at least 18 and a half hours of training a year to keep your certification. And when you get elected, you go for a year, or you become a deputy, you go for 1 week to a Department of Criminal Justice class, and you're trained. That's what's supposed to make you be able to investigate death. And it's a long way from it, because what should be able to investigate death is somebody that is an expert in investigating death. You learn what to look for. You learn the clues that other people miss, the details that need to be investigated during any type of investigation. That's what you look for. In Kentucky, you're a peace officer, so you have those powers to collect evidence and make sure all that's done too. And a lot of people don't realize that. And we collaborate that with whatever police agency we work with. We don't want to collect the evidence, but we want to be able to point that evidence out, and we take that and use that to help with a case.
And I think that's what gets overlooked too, is that the collaboration of all the different agencies. We have public safety, healthcare, the justice system. Everybody's collaborating, but we're still over here as sitting at the lowest salary. And it's also still like, it's kind of crazy that the funeral home, it's still like a 50-50 split with the funeral homes, only because counties rely on their funeral homes to do it, because they don't want to break out that extra money to give to people. So they're forcing the funeral homes to stay on the coroner side instead of giving like training to another death investigator to continue that career.
And that's true. I mean, the whole deal is like you said, it takes hours and hours. Easily, I was on call 24 hours. We do 24-hour shifts. Yesterday, I did 3 calls, and everybody's like, well, you could do that in no time. When a call averages from start to finish anywhere around 8 to 10 hours, and sometimes longer, no, it takes a while. You got to investigate the death. You have to go to the scene. You have to talk to family. You got to collect evidence if there's anything to collect. You collect the medications. You bring them back to the office. You have to touch base with the funeral home. You go back in the morgue and you do work for about an hour. And then after all that's done, then it's time to write the report. And then you write the report, get it all set up, you burn your pictures and make sure that they're there for evidence of what happened and how the patient was and everything else. Then you may go home. Last night I went home at 1 o'clock in the morning, only to be called out again. You went out a little before 1
Yeah.
and got back in about 3, and then got called out again about 5:30, and that's a normal shift. And a lot of people don't see that. Does that happen in every county? No. But at the same time, every county don't have a jail.
Yeah.
Every county does have a sheriff, and they rely on the state police a lot, but they still provide 24-hour protection, and they still have a livable wage and things like that. So when you look at the coroner's office or the death investigations across the United States, you have the same problem. You look at South Carolina, they have a funding bill right now that they're trying to pass for salaries. You look at Mississippi and Missouri, and you look at all these states that have the same. Indiana is another one that has the same issues that we have.
Yeah.
You look at some states that pay by the body. So if I'm getting paid by the body, I'm going to take as many investigations as I possibly can just to make a living wage.
Yeah.
So it shouldn't be like that. A deputy doesn't get paid by how many people he arrests or how many tickets he writes or anything else. And a county has to look at it this way, that doesn't happen with a coroner's office.
Yeah. And that's one thing you mentioned. It's not just us dealing with the salary crisis. Across the entire U.S., the national average of coroner salary is like 10 to 40,000. So our state average is 24,000. But when you look across the U.S., it's 10 to 40. That's still, in this day and time, not a true living wage for a lot of people.
No, and what happens is a lot of times is you look at these same states and they're set up almost the same way. And it's all, like I said, 80% is, okay, 80% is a hybrid system or a coroner system. And people look at that and truly think, okay, that's part-time work. You leave your job and go do a death investigation. Well, what comes first? What if you can't leave that job? Does that person lay there until somebody can get there? Whether that be an hour, whether that be 3 hours, whether that be 6 hours, what happens? Because by law, that body can't be moved unless we say it's all right to move it. Well, if I'm working another job and that job has me tied up, what happens? And in our facility, in our jurisdiction, you don't work another job when you're working this job.
Yeah.
This job is there for a reason. And in turn, with this job, you have to be en route within so many minutes, and you have to be on scene within so many minutes. And the reason for that is it has to be treated as a profession.
Yeah.
This is a death investigator doing the job that needs to be done in a timely manner to give answers to families, to give closures that need to happen.
And that's, again, the full-time job scenario that gets called a part-time job. You're on call for 24 hours a day. People die 24 hours a day, so you can't go work somewhere else. So you're blocking your day out for 24 hours where you might have to go investigate a death, and you're doing that for $19,000 to $24,000.
Well, and you got to take in account, when I looked a while ago on our CAD system, which is what we get called for. So since January 1, we have 119 cards that's been cut for our services. Out of that, we average 20, on our low month is 23 deaths that we actually investigate, fully. On our high month, so far we're hitting in the 26, 27 range. So 26 to 27 times a month we're investigating somebody's death. That's a lot.
Yeah.
On top of that, we're signing out cremations that come through. Every cremation has to be reviewed. Cremations are permanent. So we are the ones that have to sign off on those, that we know what the cause of death is. And that, again, takes time. The case has to be reviewed. It has to be signed out. Then it has to go back to whatever funeral home sent that to you. In Boyd County, that equals anywhere between 500 on a average year to 650 on a busy year on cremations. So that has to be done. Evidence has to be accounted for. There's a lot of things that has to go into play of what you do besides just death investigation.
Okay, so outside of just the death investigator crisis, we also have a crisis with medical examiners and forensic pathologists across the U.S. And their salary is a little bit better than ours at like 200 to 400,000 average range, but we still have a crisis in getting people to do that kind of schooling and get certified to do it, and come to work. So that's the reason Kentucky's went from 4 offices to 2 offices, because the U.S. I think needs about like 1,500, and we currently have like 750.
Yeah, yeah.
So-
And there's only so many of those graduate. You know that.
Yeah.
I mean, and when they're only allowed or supposed to be, there's a certification that they go by in their offices. And what is it, 250 autopsies a year is what they're supposed to do.
Yeah, like 250 to 350 maybe.
And then you got offices that are having to do 500 and 600 autopsies a year because they just don't have the forensic pathologists.
Yeah.
There's states right now that will contract with pathologists to fly in and take care of whatever needs to be taken care of, all that stuff, because they cannot get permanent people to work there. And that's sad. And people, the big thing is people do not think about death until death happens. And then when death happens, it matters a lot. It matters in a timely manner that the death certificate gets signed out. It matters that the investigation happens. It matters that if it's an autopsy, that gets back quickly. Toxicology comes back. All that stuff matters because at the whole time people are waiting for answers. People want to know, why did my loved one die? What happened to them that caused this? It's the worst day of their life. And what we do with death investigation is we just get by. And we don't need to get by. We need to make sure that it is a profession that is handled very professionally in an efficient manner and in a timely manner. And as long as we're doing that, then we're servicing the public. When we can't do that, we're not servicing the public.
And that's a big point to make too, is that the county is going to fund what people push for. So people will push for, policing and traffic laws and things like that. But like you just said, and what we talked about all of last episode, people don't think about death until it actually happens. So people aren't pushing for that kind of thing until they're met with it face to face.
Let's take death completely out of it. Let's look at volunteer fire departments. What happens with a volunteer fire department is nobody is volunteering anymore. And so in turn, nobody cares if the door's open or closed, if somebody responds or not, unless it's your loved one trapped in a car. It's your loved one that is, their house is on fire. And instead of taking 5 minutes to get to you, now it takes 10, 15, 20 minutes to get to you. Guess what? It becomes a problem. Same thing with death. A county administrator one time, and it's not this administration by any means, but one time a guy told me, he said, you run a good office. And I said, okay, how do you know that? Because you've probably hardly ever stepped foot in my office.
Yeah.
And he said, I know that because nobody calls. Nobody calls and complains. I didn't take offense to that at all. It's a good thing that nobody complains. But what I wanted to say, and what I'll keep saying and keep being an advocate for, is, but you should come through the office and look at it. You should come through the office and see what kind of facility it is. There's a lot of coroners that don't have offices.
Yeah.
There's a lot of coroners that, a lot of funeral homes that come to our office, and as soon as they walk through the door, they're like, wow.
Holy granola.
You got all this stuff.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, we do. Do we still have problems? Yeah. We get things fixed as we can fix them. But, and the whole picture is, you need to be proud of what you got. And in turn, the county needs to fund that in the same way they would fund a jail, or the same way they would fund a sheriff's office, or the same way they would fund actually the same way they'd fund the dog pound. It doesn't matter. The coroner's office is way down here because nobody says anything about it. Nobody pushes for that funding. Yeah. And it's kind of invisible until you need it.
Yeah, because somebody's always there. Somebody always shows up no matter what.
Exactly, exactly, and that's the big thing.
And it really plays a part and kind of makes you think when you see the effort and time we put into even like criminal cases and, you know, getting the prosecution aspect of it, the time that gets spent into collecting evidence that's going to put somebody away, that it harms somebody's family, things like that.
And we were talking about earlier, you know, like phones and things like that. A lot of people don't think any of that's important, but on a death investigation, it's very important. And so we will take that stuff and the time we spend getting it to a crime lab, getting it analyzed, giving it to the right people to do that so that we can get the information off of it to make an arrest if need to be made through whatever police agency we're working with. All that becomes important. If somebody moves something that they shouldn't have moved, it could easily jeopardize that case. And so we make sure that that doesn't happen, but that's not everywhere. And that's where, you know, depending on where you die, you may get answers or you may not. Or you may get a guess. And we don't like to guess.
Yeah.
We want to give professional answers. We want to be a professional organization. And in order to do that, we got to push funding along. And that's the dirty little secret a lot of times is, okay, they do their job, so we leave them alone. We'll give them a little bit of money, and this is what will happen. But in reality, people don't see the backside of that. And that's the problem with the whole crisis, and it goes across the United States. It's not just Kentucky.
Mm-hmm. And so that's like kind of the final points that we can conclude on is the fact that all of these other county officials are full-time elected officials. They make this salary and they get to do all this, like their offices are heavily funded, and death investigation offices, they're underfunded, they're overlooked, and really it's inconsistent across the state, across the U.S. and everything, and because people don't look at it until they have to. So should your family's death investigation be inconsistent just because of the place where you live?
Well, let's look at numbers. And you talked about funding. One of the things, and we'll leave it at this on this because we've talked a lot today about different things and about funding. But every bit of our numbers, what goes on a death certificate matters because it's coded, just like any other medical coding is. So guess what? Where does the CDC find out how many overdoses happened in Boyd County? The way I sign a death certificate. And if that's on there, guess what? That counts as that number. How many accidents? It counts as that number. Well, classic example. And we had a gentleman that took a fall at home, had a bleed in his head. And in turn, and we caught it as a coroner's case. It was at the hospital. The hospital was going to sign it out as respiratory failure and due to cardiac arrest. We know cardiac arrest is not a cause of death. It happens. It's a thing that happens with death. So in turn, that would have been coded wrong. Somebody that dies because they've overdosed and they go in the hospital and they die and they put brain anoxia and they leave it at that. Well, that brain anoxia also needs to include the reason that the brain lacked oxygen. And the reason they lacked oxygen is the simple fact that they overdosed, so they had acute toxic effects of whatever drug that is. Well, when that happens, guess what? The coding now hits that. Well, in a lot of states, that's money. It's money for health departments. It's money for to do Narcan saturation. It's money to help with opioid addiction. Every county in this state has money for opioid. It's basically the opioid funds that come out. And how many coroners get any of that fund? Probably none or very little.
Yeah.
And so, but who's producing a lot of those numbers? The coroner's offices.
Yeah.
So if something's signed out wrong, then in turn that hurts funding, it hurts everything, in which in turn is a trickle effect that goes downhill.
Yeah. So that leaves the question is, should the quality of that answer you get for your loved one's death depend on the place where you live? Okay, now we have a couple questions from the public. The first one is Melanie Queen from Ashland. She says, I worked in the vascular cardiac cath lab for years, and unfortunately, routine, minimally invasive procedures can result in death for a multitude of reasons. We held them in the lab until notifying family if not present, and the morgues or funeral home was available, but I have no clue about what happens after they left the lab. When this occurs, what is the coroner's role, and what procedural information do you require, and does this require autopsy?
So what ends up happening usually is we get a call from nursing services. They will leave the person in the cath lab and they will tell us what's going on, what happened exactly, and we will ask, okay, do you have a doctor that was performing the procedure that's willing to sign off on that? And if they say yes, then we usually let that happen. We worry about cause and manner of death, not litigation. So it doesn't affect our investigation a lot of times. So in turn, the doctor that was performing it or another doctor that looks over that case will sign that out through the hospital. The time of death is always the hospital's time of death. Even in the ER, we use the hospital's time of death. Now, if we're out on a scene and we show up, it's our time of death. And that's the two differences there a lot of times. So very seldom will we get involved in anything that is a medical procedure that was going on, because it's more litigation than actually cause and manner of death.
Okay, the next question is Jonathan Morrissey from Northern Kentucky, and he asks, what is the death investigation procedure when a motor vehicle crash fatality occurs?
And this gets pretty in depth,
Yeah.
because and we'll
This
probably
could be a full episode.
We'll probably do a whole episode
Yeah.
on this. But long story short, we get there, nothing's moved. We try to make sure the scene is as good as it can get. We talk to whoever the police agency is. We talk to the paramedics. We look at the patient, make sure they are deceased, and we start getting our pictures. But one of the things that we want to know is who's investigating it. We want to know if an accident reconstructionist is coming. And if those answers, if the accident reconstruction is coming, we basically sit back and wait. We leave the body where it's at, and till they get there and they do all their things, then when they say it's okay, we will remove the body. And from then on, basically we use their measurements, because we want to stay as accurate as we can. We use their report. We worry about the cause and manner of death of the body. So what caused this person's death? Blunt force trauma of the head, the chest, extremities, what was it? And then we also want to know, does this person need to be autopsied, or can we do x-rays and see what's broke and what would have caused their death? Can we do toxicology, and then can we release? If there's any litigation or anything that's going to be criminal, it's always an autopsy, no matter what. And then we work along with the accident reconstructionist to help with their report as help with ours also. So we put all that together to come up with a final cause and manner of death for that person.
Okay, so 2 really good questions today. Keep sending us those questions. If any companies or brands are still looking to be involved in the podcast, you can email us at askacoroner900@gmail.com, or message us on the Facebook or TikTok pages. Make sure you're still following us and sharing our pages out, and keep subscribing, keep watching our videos.
Thank you all. We're up to almost 800. We're like 12 people shy of hitting 800 on our Facebook page. That's a big one. We want to hit 1,000, and that's what we're shooting for right now. So hopefully it continues to grow, and thanks for watching.
Thank you.